First off, I wanted to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me back to speak again, especially having the privilege of talking for the first time this year in 2022, and giving me the opportunity to talk about a subject that I'm truly passionate about, which is health. And obviously it's super timely given the time of year where everyone is making New Year's resolutions and trying to be a bit more conscientious after the indulgences of that the holidays bring. And like, why not? Like, I was fortunate to go home to Ireland for the holidays, and there was no way I was limiting myself from my mom's cooking, like absolutely no way. But I digress. So before I begin, just as in a means of disclosure, I am a scientist working in AstraZeneca, but while I'm affiliated with AstraZeneca, that everything that I talk about today is based upon my research of the scientific literature, and I'm only representing myself. And also, I seem to have gotten the sniffles, so I apologize if I sound very nasally or if I have a sneezing attack at some point during this talk. And so the title of my talk is These Are Not New Year's Resolutions. And the reason why I decided to title the talk this way is because my aim is to educate, inform, and empower this audience with some cutting edge science all around the topic of health, and hopefully arm you with the knowledge to make better choices for yourself, your family, and potentially your social circle. And how I plan to go through this talk is to first talk about myself, who am I, how did I get here, and why you should even be listening to me, but then potentially introduce these 5 tenets of what I believe to be pillars in living a long and healthful life. One that aids in the quality of life, not just for living for the sake of it. And they'll be covered under the terms of nutrition, hydration, sleep, exercise, and community, which is fast becoming recognized a facet of a healthy life, and which may come as a surprise to some people. And so with that, who am I? Well, my name is Dr. Sarina Kajani. I'm a scientist working within the obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic disease space. I have a master's in immunology from Trinity College Dublin, and then went on to do a PhD with Dr. Fiona McGillicuddy in University College Dublin. And my PhD focused on HDL biology, which is the good cholesterol in your body, and obesity, and also macronutrient impact on HDL biology. And so very briefly, LDL, this in here, or the bad cholesterol, dumps cholesterol around the body where it is needed. And so just to preface that cholesterol is actually an important molecule that your body needs, but in excess obviously is going to be harmful and can contribute to heart disease. And so in the obese state, there's more deposition of this bad cholesterol in places like the arterial wall that are connected to your heart. And so then HDL comes along, which is your good cholesterol. And what HDL does is it takes this excess cholesterol and brings it to the liver, where it is eventually excreted into the feces. And so this ability for HDL to take on cholesterol and remove it from the body is atheroprotective, meaning that it prevents heart disease. And so unfortunately, in the obese state, this movement of cholesterol through the body and into the feces is inhibited, and the cholesterol can't get trafficked out, meaning that you increase your risk of heart disease. And this cholesterol buildup in the liver can then also contribute to another pathophysiology known as fatty liver disease, which is now increasing in the Western world, and there's no therapeutic therapy for it. And so I specifically went to Fiona's lab looking for a project within obesity and metabolism because I was chubby as a child. I was chubby, this is me in the red, as a 14-year-old, I think. And I was really chubby, and that kind of went on into my adolescence and early adulthood. And I used to comfort eat. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was quite anxious due to my tumultuous relationship with my parents. Wouldn't be able to articulate myself, so I turned to food as a safety. I left home when I was about 20, and I started my master's, where I got my interest in metabolism. And I started to lose weight through traditional methods, such as exercising more and eating well. And at this time, I was doing a high protein diet, high fat and high protein diet, so a keto diet. I'm not endorsing a keto diet in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just painting a picture of where I was at in terms of my own self. And so with that, I became increasingly fascinated by the biology of obesity, because like, what causes obesity? Is it just calories? Is it just fat? It's these macronutrients. And surely if it all took just a bit of dieting and exercise, well, then everybody would be able to lose weight. Now, this is me as a 22-year-old in the early stages of my scientific career. And that is just the most naive perspective to have on obesity. And so, like, looking at the modern food environment, it doesn't promote people to be at a healthy body weight. And we shouldn't blame people for the choices they make, because the environment is dictating how we choose foods. And so when I started my PhD on HDL biology and obesity, I'm knee deep in cardiovascular disease research. I'm learning about insulin resistance, glucose control, and atherosclerosis. And so I was in this space where I'm fascinated by like food and like how they contribute to obesity and all these metabolic diseases. And I had this wonderful opportunity to contribute to a book chapter on personalized nutrition for heart patients that clinicians would then use to give recommendations to their patients. And so through that process, I learned an awful lot about fats, proteins, carbohydrates. And then it's through this process that my love for fiber came from. And I'm sure the audience is like, wait, what? Fiber? Why fiber? And so, like, yes, think prunes, metamucil, bran flakes, everything. I'm obsessed with it. Now, bearing in mind, I was a 22-year-old that was obsessed with high fat, high protein. Where did this love of fiber suddenly come from? Because fiber is technically a carbohydrate, and like carbohydrates is a bad word in these fields. And so, when I was going through this literature, I found that fiber actually could help you lose weight, prevent cardiovascular disease, reduce your risk of diabetes, reduce your colon cancer risk. It just didn't make sense to me. I was like, what's like fiber? Like who's talking about fiber? This seemingly innocuous food group that's not very sexy, but it seemed to be doing all these positive things for health. And so with that, I wanted to set up the platform for me getting into the first pillar of what I think would be needed for a healthy 2022 and for life is nutrition. And so by way of a background, I wanted to talk about macronutrients. And they're the main components that make up our food. So there's fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And most foods are made up of a combination of all three of these. And while they are important for the maintenance of our health of our bodies, any one macronutrient in excess is going to be damaging. And so over the last couple of decades, we have seen the popularity and rise and fall of different macronutrient-based diets. So in the early 60s, fat was vilified, and then people made a turn toward carbohydrates in the 80s. But then those carbohydrates then to be shunned in the 90s, so like the likes of the Atkins diet and low carb. And now we're amidst a protein renaissance, where it's protein filled this, protein that. And so traditionally, more attention and focus has been on macronutrients themselves and not the actual food, which I believe has resulted in disastrous outcomes, which I'll allude to later. And so within these macronutrient groups, there are even more subgroups. So with fat, you have saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fat, where saturated fat is thought to contribute to heart disease, whereas poly and monounsaturated fats are termed to be protective against heart disease. But then also we have proteins, and proteins are made up with the building blocks known as amino acids. And each protein source will have varying degrees of amino acids contained in them. And just by way of dispelling a diet myth, it was generally regarded that plant sources of protein were not complete proteins, but that has since been debunked. And it is now accepted that plant sources of proteins do have all amino acids, of which there are 20, including the 9 essential amino acids, but they will have them in different varying degrees. And so the only reason that you would ever run into problems or deficiencies when consuming a plant protein-based diet is that if you consume only one source or two sources of plant proteins. And so that was this is this graph showing here where there's the essential and non-essential amino acids in different food groups and how each of these foods actually contain all of them. And then we go into our carbohydrates, which I believe is like an oversimplified catch-all term to describe mono, di, and polysaccharides. So mono and disaccharides are usually commonly referred to as sugars, whereas polysaccharides are more complex in nature. And so where does fiber feature and why do I care about it so much? And so fiber is technically under the carbohydrate macronutrient umbrella and is regarded as the undigestible part of a plant. Key word being undigestible here. Humans don't possess the enzymes to degrade and digest fibers. Enters our large intestine relatively unchanged. And it can come in multiple forms of like soluble, insoluble, fermentable, unfermentable. And I'm not just talking about like prunes and metamucil or bran flakes, but like all these foods here that you can see all contain fiber. And so what was it about fiber that piqued my interest in the first place? So when I was examining the literature for this book chapter, it became increasingly apparent that increased fiber intake protected against heart disease, which was the focus of that book chapter, which is great. But it also seemed to have an impact on preventing type 2 diabetes and obesity. And so the mechanism by which fiber is thought to elicit these health promoting properties is still subject to debate, but we have some clues as to how it's working. And so with regard heart disease risk, fibre has been shown to reduce the amount of LDL, so that bad cholesterol, the bad cholesterol that dumps itself in the atherosclerotic plaques within your arteries. But it has a minimal effect on HDL, that good cholesterol that's going to promote the efflux or the evacuation of cholesterol from your body. And so by reducing the amount of excess cholesterol being left in places where it shouldn't be, like your arteries, we can reduce cardiovascular disease risk. And so then when it comes to managing type 2 diabetes, let me premise this with type 2 diabetes being a disease whereby there is a loss of glucose or glycemic control. And so when we eat a meal, for instance, white bread, I'll show you through this graph here, what happens is that food is digested and broken down fairly quickly, causing blood glucose levels to rise. And this signals this blood glucose level rise signals the pancreas to release insulin, and then the insulin then targets to other cells to let this glucose then enter those cells so they can use it for energy. In the diabetic patient, however, the balance of glucose to insulin isn't controlled appropriately, and so glucose remains in circulation longer than it needs to be. And if glucose stays in the blood for longer than it should be, you get the complications associated with type 2 diabetes, such as renal failure and ocular degeneration. But foods that have a high fiber content, such as brown bread, won't cause the same rapid blood glucose spike. So then first off, you don't see as much glucose going into the circulation, but also the pancreas doesn't need to release as much insulin either to deal with that blood glucose rise. And so when you replace the white bread with whole grain bread, less of it is absorbed in the traditional sense, so we don't see that massive rise of blood glucose, and the fiber then reaches the large intestine relatively unchanged, and I'll explain that more about that in a moment. And then in terms of managing weight gain, because fiber essentially mops up excess cholesterol and reduces sugar absorption from food, there's an overall reduction in caloric absorption of food, which may be minuscule meal to meal, but over time will add up. And so you potentially avoid unnecessary weight gain over time. And so these are some examples of how fiber may be having these beneficial effects from a macro perspective on metabolism. And so with advancing technology, we've come to recognize why a diet in fiber is so beneficial to us. So located in our large intestines are a population that are more dense and more diverse than what we see in the Amazon rainforest, known as the gut microbiome. So a plethora of bacteria, viruses, and fungi make up this gut microbiota, and this has become increasingly known as the body's second brain. The fiber we consume feeds these populations of bacteria, and in kind, they produce metabolites known as short-chain fatty acids that have beneficial effect on our overall health. And so metabolites such as short-chain fatty acids are able to exert a wide range of effects on host physiology, so us. And so these short-chain fatty acids actually can dictate intestinal cell movement, blood flow, and gastrointestinal pH. And that has an impact on how we absorb nutrients, but also electrolytes. They are also important promoters of colonic health and intestinal barrier integrity. And what I mean by that is that within our microbiome, we have where our intestinal wall is, it's only one cell layer thick. So between the food that is meant to be excreted and our blood circulation, it's just one cell that is a barrier. So when we feed fiber to our gut bugs, they actually look after that barrier and reinforce it. So that means that it improves our immune function, but also that we don't get any of those waste products going into circulation either. And so I spoke a lot about how fiber has all these beneficial effects the last talk I did, so I don't want to go over it, but I know that that's on YouTube, so you can catch it on there. And so with all that science, what does this mean for you, the audience, in terms of nutrition? Like, we're in an environment where we're constantly shoveled information for what's the best diet for optimal health, and how do you as consumers determine what that best option is? And so we can talk about like the cholesterol, the immune system, the microbiome, and we have all this scientific data, and we can say like these back up the claims that certain foods do this or that. But when it comes down to it, diet is the leading predictor variable for all-cause mortality and chronic disease burden, meaning that the dietary pattern that you abide by will determine your disease risk, but also your health span, so your quality of life. And so our focus has been like within, I think when we think about food and nutrition, our focus is generally on energy density. So how many calories are in a food, and what is the macronutrient composition? So the fat, the carbs, the protein, and like whether stuff has been taken out, like fat, sugar, and salt. And then, and so what has it been replaced with? Because it's always in relative terms. And I personally believe that there's been too much emphasis on the processing of real food. And as a result, our focus has become muddled. And so science doesn't care about labels. And what is becoming very apparent is a common theme among dietary patterns, which are consistently shown to reduce disease risk and enhance lifespan. And this incredible review done by David Katz, who's an MD in Yale, he was asked, what is the best diet? And so he did a meta-analysis of all the diets that are currently available, and looked, so the ones that are popular at the moment, so low carb, low fat, low glycemic, Mediterranean, mixed, or paleo. And he very succinctly surmised that whole foods are a common denominator in diets associated with low level of disease risk. So a diet that favors minimally processed and direct from nature foods, avoiding refined starch and added sugars, and using water as the main hydration source. And so there's always room to follow any diet badly. And I just want to illustrate this with these three popular dietary patterns: low fat, vegan, and keto, which are quite extreme in their etiology and very different from each other. But if we look at them comparatively, despite these diets being incredibly different in nature, I'm sure we can all agree that the components that make up these diets right here are incredibly unhealthy. Like there's no way that this could be regarded as healthy or in any way, shape, or form going to promote a healthful life. But if I change these components to this, and they still fit within the same categories, things change drastically. And so at the end of the day, we want people to be eating to satiation, meaning that you feel full when you have a meal without the risk of overeating and becoming overweight. But also they need to be consistent with their dietary pattern. So whatever you decide to do, that you are consistent with it. In order to be great, you need to be good 80% of the time. I'm sure everyone has experience in a new fad diet, especially with this new year, and for old habits to then steadily creep in as the year goes on. I think the emphasis should be placed on small habitual changes that will reap better rewards in the long term, because everyone knows these like quick fixes don't work. And so stacking on from that, of making making small habitual changes to eat healthier. So it's not just a New Year's resolution, but one that you take on for life. And so when deciding to make healthier food choices, I think it's really important for people to reflect on their own food habits. So keep a food diary, do it for 3 or 4 days, just to actually assess where you're at and actually understand how you eat. Because if you don't have that data, then you can't really navigate how to move forward in order to make a better decision for yourself. So having a food diary and assessing it like a scientist would, and reflecting, well, like, do I eat too fast? Do I eat mindlessly? Do I eat when I'm not hungry? Or do I always feel the need to have dessert? I know for me, over the Christmas time, I was having dessert after every dinner. And I love my dessert, but it's now become it's become a habit now, and a very nice habit, but it's not going to be good for me in the long term. And so we need to replace those bad habits with healthier habits. So for me, what I've done now, that like if I don't have dessert, I will have a mini version of the dessert, but also a cup of like sweet tea, like a vanilla chai or a chocolate tea, just to curb those cravings. So I don't feel restricted, but I'm still getting that little treat, and that subsides that kind of side of my brain. And then also to reinforce those good habits that you make. I think as people, we tend to do this whole all or nothing, especially when it comes to resolutions, which isn't fair to do to ourselves. You got to give yourself a pat on the back when you do make a good choice for yourself. But also, like, if you mess up at a certain meal, leave it at that meal. Don't wait until I'll start next Monday, or I'm going to start again the week. Like I'm going to start tomorrow. If you mess up at lunch, leave it at lunch. That's it. We're done. And then you carry on with your health promoting diet or lifestyle change at dinner time. Like I said, most of being great is being good 80% of the time. And so if you're consistent with that habit, you will reap the rewards and it won't feel like it's work. So then moving on to my second pillar of health is hydration. And there's no two ways about it. Just drink your water. Like, I don't know how to say it. We're made up of 60% of water. You need to be hydrated. And I don't care where you get it from. Preferably water, but if you're going to get it from tea, coffee, still all water. It's liquid. That's what you need. And so I've spoken about increasing your fiber intake. Obviously, I'm obsessed with fiber. And so with that, there's an increase in material passing through your digestive tract. And so we all know like fiber is great for keeping you regular, but fiber also has this ability to mop up molecules that are in excess in our bodies. So the likes of hormones, cholesterol, bile, any unwanted toxins. And so it takes about a half a day to 2 days for food to pass from your mouth to the point of excretion. And so that's ample time for that gut microbiome to work on that fiber to give you those short chain fatty acids back to promote health. But then it also means that it's enough time for that anything that's of waste to evacuate your body. However, if you're eating junk food, there's not a lot of fiber. So your bowels have to actually work harder in order to push things through. And as a result, there's more you can become constipated essentially. And as a result of that, you put your body at more exposure to those unwanted toxins. And so the things that were supposed to be evacuating your body within a normal time span is now being reintroduced back into your body because it can be reabsorbed through your intestines. And so when we have increased fiber intake, we also need to increase our water intake to move things through. I actually have a very good experiment that you can do at home to measure your gut transit time. If people want to know at the end of the talk, I can explain that. But anyway, so drink more water. Also, research indicates that not drinking enough water can negatively impact your focus, your alertness, and your short-term memory. And I also wanted to just highlight this interesting paper that I came across over the Christmas time, because obviously, like, we're all a bit indulgent. I'm the type of person that's like, well, it's Christmas, but I don't want to go overboard and everything. And so I found this paper really fascinating. And so they were just looking at water consumption and the concentration of salt in plasma. And so I'm sure this audience is well aware that there is a correlation between salt intake and blood pressure. And the increase of salt intake to increase blood pressure can then increase your cardiovascular disease risk. And so what this experiment was doing was that they got 10 healthy volunteers and they got them to drink some soup with salt, some soup with salt and water, and some soup with salt and more water. And so each person, they came to this clinic once a week for 4 weeks. And what I want you to focus in on is on this first visit here, where the volunteers were drinking just the soup. We're looking at blood pressure and plasma osmolarity. And what that essentially means is just the concentration of solutes in the blood. So the sodium, the amount of sodium in the blood, essentially. And so for the first visit, where they're just drinking this soup, blood pressure does not go up. And also the solute, like the sodium concentration goes down, because obviously the soup has this diluting effect of the sodium within the blood. Then when they came on the second visit, they have the same soup, but it's really salty. And so we see a massive spike with this red line here on their second visit of blood pressure. And this correlated to the amount of salt that was in the blood as well. So this is an acute challenge. But then when they had their third and fourth visit, where they were given that salty soup, but they were concurrently given 500 ml or 750 ml of water, we don't see, we're focusing on the green and the blue line. While plasma osmolarity did go up with the 500 ml of water, that did not correlate to an increase in blood pressure. But if you had more water with that salty soup, we don't see the same increase in salt concentration in the blood, and that also meant that blood pressure didn't increase. So while the authors concluded that concurrent intake of water should be considered when evaluating the role of salt in blood pressure, I think it's good for the audience to know that, like, say if you go out for like a really nice meal where there's potentially could be a lot of salt, or you have a takeout, if you just like chug a load of water with it, maybe you will offset the acute blood pressure effects that you would have from that meal. So that was that one. And then habit stacking, again, going back to this whole thing of like, how do we take on these scientific papers so that I can be a healthier person? And basically we're trying to negate the resistance that comes with trying to be a healthier person. So just make it easier to let yourself get water in the day. So have a bottle of water at your desk, have a bottle of water by your bedside. Remove those barriers that will not make you successful. So for me, I know that I always keep a pint of water by my bedside. I chug it the moment I wake up. I do not negotiate with myself. I'm saying, I'm having that pint of water. You need to hydrate yourself in the morning. And then or if you're like a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, you don't really like drinking water, just say to yourself, I'll have a cup of water before I have my cup of tea or coffee. You're just increasing your volume. We need to be hydrated. It's really, really important. We're 60% water. I can't caution this enough. And then also just to know whether you're in a good stage of hydration or not, the color of your urine is actually a good proxy. So it should be straw color. Any darker than that, you're probably dehydrated. So yeah, don't put that pressure on your kidneys. Drink your water. So then this goes on to my next pillar of health, which is sleep. And so what I find really interesting about humans is that we are the only animal in the human animal kingdom that will forego sleep to do other things like work or do, I don't know, whatever we're up to that we're not doing sleep. Sleep is incredibly important for rest and repair. Your body needs to do a lot because we're living in an environment where it's all go, go, go. We're always like high pressure, high stress, everything else. To forego sleep is doing more damage than you'd realize. And that is coming to the fore in terms of scientific literature. So I just wanted to go through this recent study that came out with the PREDICT study, where they got 953 healthy volunteers and they were followed over a course of 2 weeks. And they ate the standardized meal, so they knew what they were getting. The scientists knew what the volunteers were getting in terms of macronutrients. And these volunteers wore continuous glucose monitors and then sleep monitors. And so they measured their sleep timing from when they went to sleep and when they woke up, and their sleep quality. And so sleep was analyzed and compared to the standardized meal of the known macronutrient composition, meaning that the scientists knew the composition of the food. So they were only measuring what impact that sleep had on how the patients or the volunteers dealt with the food in the morning, so for breakfast. And so as part of the caveat of this study was that most of these participants actually got on average 7 hours of sleep. So I think the general consensus is between 7 to 9 hours. So these people were getting a good amount of sleep. So I think there's a book by Matthew Walker, which is very good, The Power of Sleep, and it really does hone in on you need to get between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. There's only, I think, 1% or 10%, less than, I'm going to have to fact check that, but it's less than 10% of the population anyway that can actually deal with less than 7 hours of sleep. So just bearing that in mind, if you think you're someone that works well on 6 hours of sleep, you're probably not. But going to bed, so they had these patients were having an average of 7 hours of sleep a night. And so that contributed to seeing no differences in their blood sugar regulation in the morning time. But then what they found was that people that went to bed later, despite having the same amount of time of sleep, people that went to bed later were associated with impaired metabolism at breakfast time the following day. So these volunteers, even though they were all getting around 7 hours of sleep, those participants that went to sleep later had less regulated glucose control in the breakfast in the morning. And so better sleep quality actually translated into healthier metabolism. So if you have a higher quality sleep, that was shown to predict better blood sugar control, regardless of what you had in the morning. So whether you had a high fat, a high protein, or a high carbohydrate breakfast. And so from an individual standpoint, if you feel like you had like a really crappy sleep the night before, the expectation is that your metabolism isn't actually going to be able to deal with the breakfast that you have because you haven't had a good night's sleep. And so the study concluded that sleeping less than usual or poor quality sleep or even going to bed later were all associated with worsening metabolic control for breakfast in the next morning. And so there's also this other study that was done that if you do not get adequate sleep or good quality sleep, the likelihood of you to eat high sugar, high refined carbohydrate foods is more likely than if you had a restful sleep. So these all are contributing factors that towards when we're like looking at health, how sleep has an actual facet in terms of regulating your metabolism. And so what actionable items can we use with this knowledge? And so you need to get into a nighttime routine. I'm not sure how many people of this audience have children or had children when they were younger, but you had a nighttime routine for them. Why don't we have a nighttime routine as adults? And that means turning off screens an hour, half an hour before bed. You don't need to be looking at your phone the whole time. Those text messages will be there in the morning. Not being on your laptop, not watching TV. Read a book. I have the worst attention span, I've realized, because I started reading and I was like, why can't I get past second page? I just don't understand. And that's something I need to work on this year. But like it gets you into a state of mind where you're reducing your stress levels. And if you're going to bed less stressed, you're going to have a better quality of sleep. But also reflecting on your day. Like, I don't think, given the fact that we're so busy all the time, we don't give ourselves 5 minutes of the day to actually reflect on how the day went, how you felt different interactions went, and also like being thankful for having a day that you were alive and you did stuff. Gratitude is fast, like, I know it's going into the realm of like woo-woo science, but practicing gratitude has so many beneficial effects on your body that we just are not equipped to understand scientifically yet. We just don't have the technology. But correlating gratitude as well as positive health factors is definitely a thing. And so giving yourself, like, you owe it to yourself to just be thankful that like things are going well. And why not do that right before you go to bed? And then also there's increasing evidence to show that going to bed at around the same time and waking up around the same time is really beneficial for circadian rhythm. And this goes into how our body reacts to different things at different times of the day. And we're really actually good at doing things at nighttime, like say rest and repair, that we wouldn't, those programs won't be turned on during the day. And so having a solid frame of when you go to bed and when you wake up will have positive health impacts as well. The next pillar of health, I believe, is exercise. And I probably don't need to go through the benefits of exercise with this audience. I'm sure everyone understands that exercise is important. I will say, however, exercise is not an appropriate weight loss tool. I do not want people thinking, oh, I'm going to run 5K every week for the next 3 weeks or whatever, and I'm going to lose a load of weight. Like, yeah, you will, but it's not, the benefits that you get from the caloric burn from exercising is not appropriate for weight loss. You're better off looking on the nutrition side of things if you're looking at weight loss. But the benefits of weight loss or exercise is far beyond of what you get from weight loss in terms of like your cardiovascular disease, in terms of insulin sensitivity, for your mental health. All these things are better for you in an overall health paradigm. And so when it comes to, say, if you're a person that isn't into exercise, or you're just not, you don't feel like you're an exercise type of person, I think it's important to, again, assess yourself. Why do you want to exercise? Why do you want to become an active person? Is there a reason behind it? Like, write it down, because once you have a why, it's a lot easier to actually act on and do the thing that you say you're going to do. And so, is it because you want to become fit, or do you want to look better? Or do you want to go on a trip where there's a lot of activity? Or do you want to be able to play with your grandkids in the garden? Is it because you want to have less anxiety? Or do you want to increase your cardiovascular respiration? Write down those goals and then stick to them, because your why is not for aesthetic reasons, it's for health reasons, so that you can live on this planet longer, but also have a quality of life for being on this planet, and enjoy the process. I think it's really interesting that people like, they will box themselves in and say, oh, I'm not an exercise type of person. I wasn't an exercise type of person. Like, now I'm definitely an exercise type of person. And so when it comes back to this habit stacking again, where sometimes you just have to get out of your own way and put things in place where you can actually promote yourself to do exercise. So for instance, having your gym clothes by your bedside. So when you get up, you just have to put them on and get out the door and go to the gym. Even just go for a walk, whatever it is that you want to do. Put the yoga mat, the bike in your room, do it. My personal favorite is, I actually really enjoy going on TikTok. But as a person that has a job and responsibilities, I cannot be wasting too much time on TikTok. And so what I will do is I will allow myself go on TikTok as long as I'm on the Stairmaster. And I guarantee you, there's nothing like the Stairmaster to stop you being on TikTok for more than 15 minutes. So that's something I do. But also, like, just give yourself 4 minutes. Don't tell yourself, oh, I have to do this for an hour, or I have to do this for the next 45 minutes. Do the first 4 minutes. If you don't want to do it after the 4 minutes, don't. Just get into that habit of, I'm a person that does some amount of exercise every day. And once that becomes habitual, then it is so much easier for you to actually progress and add time onto your whatever exercise you want to do. Also to mention that it doesn't, like, it's every exercise that you do is going to be beneficial. But like, not to knock like things like low intensity, steady state exercise. So walking. I think walking is a really important facet of health. What has been found with groups of people within the blue zones, which are people that live to 100. They have very healthy lifestyles. And one facet of that is that they don't exercise in the traditional way that we do in the Western world, where we go to the gym for an hour and that's what we do. They actually move a lot. And so unfortunately for us, we're in an environment where, like, after COVID, we sit at our desks a lot. We're very tuned in with what's going on, but we don't move a lot. And that actually seems to have more of a positive effect on metabolism than just going to the gym for 1 hour. So what you do over the other, like, 18 hours of the day that you're awake is more important. And so, not to knock, like, just going for a walk for 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. It's just on that. And just the mindset in terms of, if you feel like you're not a fit person. I wasn't a fit person. You've seen the photo of me from when I was a teenager. That is not a girl that exercises, and that's okay. But I stuck at it through college, and I became a fit person. And so you need to have that kind of voice in your head that says, is this what an active person would do? An active person will go out for 4 minutes. It's not that big a deal. Just do it, right? So it's just kind of like getting out of your own way a little bit. And sometimes you got to give yourself tough love, but sometimes you just got to give yourself a pat on the back too. And just in terms of, like, bringing up these habits, like, some people say it takes 3 weeks for a habit to form. There are studies done on this, and it actually can take up to nearly a year for the habit to form. And it's a habit is when you don't have to spend that much mental effort in order to do something. And while it might take you longer to get a habit as a habit, just because, say, for instance, if exercise is one of those habits that you're like, it's taking me so long, doesn't necessarily mean that other habits will be as hard to pin down. So yeah, that's just that one on exercise. And then finally, community. And so the importance of belonging has only kind of come to the surface as a prominent feature of living a long and healthful life. And I'm referencing blue zones here, where I mentioned earlier about where people live up to 100. And then also the likes of Gabor Mate and Johann Hari are just some of the people that are pioneering the work on this. And so, evolutionarily speaking, we diverged from the hominids, or early hunter-gatherers, who are small tribes that existed together in a community setting, where each person had their own role. And in the evolutionary, like, timeline, this has been a very short amount of time where we live in these isolated clusters now, where people leave their grandparents. Like, I live here in America on my own. My family's in Ireland. So we have these, like, isolated clusters. And I think we're very, like, while we're digitally connected, we are lacking the emotional connectedness as a result. And so research has shown that social connectedness can impact your long-term health and habits. And so you're likely to mimic the habit of your 3 closest friends. So make sure your 3 closest friends are into exercise and healthy eating, because that will actually have a positive effect on how you act. But then you experience less stress, because when you're around a social group, loneliness has been shown to decrease life expectancy, because people feel like they don't have anybody to rely on. Whereas if you have the social network and you know that there's someone there for you, that can shed that excess stress. Being in a social group also, in a group that people are happy, that has a knock-on effect on your own happiness, where you can actually scientifically become 15% more happier when you surround yourself with happier people. And so also it decreases your risk of chronic disease outside of nutrition and those other factors. So isolated older people are more likely to develop chronic disease compared to people with friends. And so maybe, like, this year, as part of this whole, like, pillar of health and, like, looking for longevity, maybe try and bolster up your relationships more and try and turn up for your relationships more. I know for me that I definitely wouldn't be where I'm at if I wasn't for my friends and family. I really put that as a priority on my list of things. And so while this is probably a new facet of health, it is actually very, very important. We just don't have as much hard science to show that it is important. And so I hope I've convinced you that we don't want to make resolutions this year. We're making lifestyle changes for life. And they all come under these pillars of nutrition, hydration, sleep, exercise, and community. And it might seem like a lot, but it really is just stacking on those small habits, and they will reap bigger rewards if you stick to them. Just be consistent. And then with that, these are my social medias and my contacts. I'm at Sarina Kajani on Instagram and Twitter. And then I also have a Patreon where I make like fibre recipes because I'm obsessed. And with that, I will take any questions.
So we did have a question. Which type of fiber is best? So natural or like products like Metamucil, or is there no difference?
So there actually is a difference. We don't want to be chugging Metamucil to get our fiber intake up. What you want to do is have a plant diverse diet. So what the scientific literature has shown that if you have around 30 plants a week, and that includes spices, herbs, like vegetables, legumes, plants, beans, all that kind of stuff. If you have around 30 of them a week, that will promote a more microbial diversity, which then correlates to reduced disease risk.
We did have a couple people ask about the gut transit time experiment. So I'm afraid you're going to have to explain that one.
Okay, so this is actually kind of a fun experiment to do, like if you have kids and stuff, but also for your own sake. So what you do is you make a standard vanilla cupcake, or lemon cupcake, whatever flavor you like, I don't care, make a cupcake. And what you're going to do in the batter mix is put in a load of blue food coloring. So these cupcakes are very, very blue. And what you're going to do is have the blue cupcake, start the time of when you have that blue cupcake, and when the blue cupcake has evacuated your body and you'll be able to tell from the color of your stool, then that will tell you the transit time that you have.
Inquiring minds want to know. Thank you, Dr. Kajani. So I did have a question. Do you have any data on including like fermented foods in your diet, like sauerkraut, kimchi, that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. So the benefits of having food that has been fermented is huge. So the likes of sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, they have a really positive effect on your microbiome. First off, because they actually provide bacterial species to inhabit your gut, but also because they're partly digested themselves through the fermentation process, they're actually easier for us to digest. But also evolutionarily speaking, we as humans have evolved to have these fermented foods. So our bodies are actually really well equipped for dealing with them and digesting them. And so they definitely do have a lot of positive effects on metabolism.
Okay, so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, what do we know about all the species of gut bacteria? I mean, how much do we really know about which species are beneficial and that kind of thing?
So the data that's coming out on within that space is fairly new, like as in the last like 10 years. And so I think we need to be careful about that data. So we can correlate like, oh, these species are associated with increased obesity, or these species are increased in leanness. Right now, because there's so much data and so much data that I don't think we necessarily have the means of analyzing it in an appropriate way right now, that we can say like convincingly, oh, these populations are responsible for these beneficial effects. I think when it comes down to it, it actually is everything together that contributes to this positive metabolic phenotype that we see. And it's because there's so many bacterial species in our guts, like over 1 trillion, or at least 1 trillion bacteria, we cannot say definitively, oh, it's one that's doing it. I think it's a contributing effect of all of them together and then working in teams, because they do interact with each other. They do help each other out. Some bacteria are going to get rid of the bad bacteria. Like, who knows? I think we're just in our infancy in understanding that, to be honest.
This is an interesting question. Does it matter if the water you drink while eating is warm or cold?
I'm not too sure on that. So I've seen different things on, like, well, cold water will increase your internal thermogenesis, so that will ramp up metabolism. But then also warm water it's easier for your body to ingest or whatever. I haven't read up on it, to be honest, so I don't know. But like, does it really matter if you're in the grand scheme of things, if you're getting enough hydration?
I don't know if you can answer this one or not. Can we reverse type 2 diabetes?
I'm going to be careful with how I answer this. I think there is space to reverse type 2 diabetes. Depending on whether that is done through drug therapy or through food, I think because diabetes is such a nuanced disease, it is now fast becoming regarded as 5 types of diabetes rather than just type 1 and type 2, because there's the autoimmune aspect and then obviously the metabolism side of things. However, if we can get to a stage for a patient to not put as much pressure on their pancreas to secrete insulin, but that we can get their glucose control underway and then give the pancreas the ability to repair itself so then it can then release insulin in an appropriate manner, I think we can get to a place where we reverse type 2 diabetes. I don't think we're that far away from it either. So yeah, that's my answer.
I mean, I can say anecdotally, as a type 2 diabetic, I know what I've done that's helped, and it's a lot of what you're actually talking about. All right, so we will go ahead and bring it to a close for today. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Dr. Sarina Kajani for helping us discover more about our world and for helping us kick off Lunch Break Science for 2022. Thank you again for joining us today, and stay safe and stay curious.